Okay, you can go ahead, Susan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll call our meeting to order. It is 6:06, and at the beginning, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I would like to look at the agenda now, and would somebody like to move the approval of the agenda, please? Moved by Stephen, seconded by Derek. Any discussion, additions? Mayor Risser?
Just a quick point of order, Madam Chair. Oh, I think Heather has brought over the participants who were in the waiting room.
Yes, got joined. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're just at the process of the agenda, and it's been moved and seconded. Any additions to the agenda? Not seeing any. All in favor? Contrary minded? Agenda approved. So we'll go to number 4 on the agenda, the approval of the minutes. And 4A are the PAC committee meeting minutes from May the 19th. Would somebody like to move the approval of the minutes from May the 19th? Moved by Derek, seconded by Stephen. Any errors or omissions in the minutes from May 19th? Not seeing any hands up. All in favor of approving the minutes? Contrary minded? Minutes approved. 4B, Planning Advisory Committee, May 26th meeting minutes. Would somebody like to move the approval of the May 26th minutes? Moved by Ed, seconded by Stephen. Any errors or omissions in the May 26th meeting minutes? Not seeing any. All in favor of approval of the minutes? Contrary minded? Minutes approved. Number 5, business arising from the minutes and any unfinished business. There aren't any. And then moving on to number 6, the public information meeting. 6A are the new draft planning documents, the municipal planning strategy, land use bylaw, subdivision bylaw with specifications. And I'm going to turn it over to Dawn and to Upland Planning and Design.
Thank you, Chair Sanford. Excuse me. So the purpose of the meeting this evening, it's a second public information meeting. We held the first last week, and that was properly advertised as per our public participation program. So tonight we're having our second one to go through a few minor changes since last week, and I will let Upland do that. We are hoping this evening to have a recommendation go forward to council. And the recommendation from PAC, our Planning Advisory Committee meeting, that's to have this go forward for council to consider it. They need to make a recommendation. Planning Advisory Committee doesn't approve anything. They're an advisory body. This is our schedule. So if we have recommendation this evening, it would go forward onto the agenda package, and we would hopefully have reading on June 22nd. After that, we would, under the Municipal Government Act, we have to advertise twice for a public hearing. We would have an advertisement on June 29th, and then the second advertisement, oh, thank you, Heather, on July 14th. From there, we would have public hearing, and that's another opportunity for the public to weigh in. Again, all our letters will go out, all 1,084 letters will go out again for the public hearing. And later that evening, council may choose to have second reading that night or put it over to the next council meeting if they so choose. So this evening we have our third draft, which would be dated this evening, June 2nd, and Upland will be going through the changes. And so our motion will be updated to reflect the new date of the planning documents. There'll also be some minor changes to the planning documents, and the wording is going to be minor non-substantive changes. And what that means, it's a bit of cross-referencing between policies in our municipal planning strategy and, say, the statements of provincial interest. but also if we find a typo or a comma out of place, there would be no substantive changes, so no major changes if we go forward with that wording. So just be aware that there may be a few minor, very minor changes from the June 2nd version that Upland will be going through this evening. So I'm going to stop, and I will let Stefan and Ian of Upland take over. Thank you.
Thanks, Don, and thank you, everyone. We did have a question on the Q&A, wondering how many people are participating currently, and I think we're at 13 attendees from the members of the public. So just let me share my screen here. All right. So as Don mentioned, this is our second of 2 public information meetings on the draft planning documents. My name is Ian Watson. I'm a planner with Upland, and I'm here with Stefan, my colleague. And apologies if you came to the first public information meeting or even the public open house. This is going to start sounding like a broken record. You might be able to give the presentation yourself at this point. But I know there's new people, and we want to go through all the information for the benefit of everyone. And then at the end of my presentation, we'll go into a little bit of the changes that have happened since the last draft. And also, you know, as we go through it, there's a number of questions we got after the last public information meeting. I'll try and address those as we go through the documents. So in terms of what we're dealing with tonight, if you're here tonight, you've probably heard about Project Lunenburg. It's been going on for, I guess, you know, what are we, about 2 years now. And the first major piece of work in this project has been the development of a comprehensive community plan. And this is a pretty unique thing. It's made this a really special project. I think it was very exciting to work on. Because in Nova Scotia, often most municipalities start here at the municipal planning strategy, land use bylaw, subdivision bylaw, and those are, you know, very, they tend to be very functional documents, and they deal primarily with land use and development. But Lunenburg's done this comprehensive community plan ahead of that, which is a more strategic document that covers not just, you know, how we control development, but also the programming side of things, the partnership side of things, the funding part of things. It's a strategic plan full of a variety of strategic actions to you know, chart the whole course holistically of Lunenburg. So on that, there are a number of things that, you know, came up out of the last public information meeting. Things related to affordable housing. I can't think of what else came out, but they're all very good comments. But you'll see that we haven't necessarily addressed them in the planning documents because they are, the documents we're about to deal with are very much related to, you know, that control of development and getting a permit, and things about tax breaks and that kind of thing. Those are more of a programming side of things, and those fall under the comprehensive community plan. So out of that, we have the municipal planning strategy, which is the higher level policy and a bit of the context for the planning decisions we've made. And then we get down to the nuts and bolts, which are the land use bylaw, subdivision bylaw, and then the specifications for the subdivision bylaw. And these are the documents that, you know, have numbers and control whether or not you get a permit to build your house or open a restaurant or whatever it may be. So as we were, you know, as we were starting on the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw, subdivision bylaw, we went back and looked at, you know, the extensive engagement that was done as part of the CCP, Comprehensive Community Plan, the background research that was done for that. That's all still available on the Project Lunenburg website, and pulled out a number of key issues that had to do specifically with planning, with land use planning and development. And those that came up, you know, that we felt came up consistently and strongly were housing, a working waterfront, sustainable infrastructure, changing climate, and living heritage. So these are identified as key issues in the municipal planning strategy. And the idea is that hopefully these documents address all of these key issues in the ways that they can. So another really neat thing about this project is we've taken this as an opportunity to, I see that we also have a Q&A, and I'm gonna, yes, I should address that. So the question is, are attendees able to ask questions, please, after the presentation? So yeah, what we are gonna do, so we have the Q&A there. You can see it on your little menu bar on Zoom. You can type in questions, and then once I'm done my presentation, we're done our presentation, we'll come back and we'll go through them and answer them to the best of our ability. So, you know, type them in as you think of them, and we'll come back at the end. Thanks. So in Nova Scotia, traditionally, if you've ever opened a business or built a house or whatever, you will have dealt with a land use bylaw. And traditionally, what you have is one type of zone. You know, I'm in the R1 zone or the downtown commercial zone or whatever it is. And that zone controls what you're allowed to do with your land, the shape that your buildings can take, the form, you know, setbacks and all that kind of stuff. And then subdivision, you know, the size of lots and all that kind of thing. And, you know, this is relatively simple in that you only have to remember your one zone, but it leads to a lot of exceptions and special conditions required, because zones have to do everything. Lunenburg, I think, presents a really unique opportunity to be a little cutting edge in terms of planning. Lunenburg is very strong in form. There's a very strong pattern in the lots that are created. So what we did is we actually created a new approach to planning regulation for this project. So we separated out those three things. So each piece of property in Lunenburg now has a lot zone, a use zone, and a form zone. And they deal individually with each of their topics, and we'll go through that. What this allows is a very clear document structure. If you're subdividing, for example, and you need to know how big a lot can be, you go right to the lot zone section. If you're opening a restaurant and need to know if that use is allowed on your property, you go right to the use zone section. So it's very clear in that sense, I think. And what it also allows is fewer exceptions in the documents. You're not trying to have one zone, you know, allow a certain use, but only to a certain scale, and having exceptions and notwithstandings and all of those little things. So, you know, by overlapping these three layers of zonings in different ways, we can have a really fine-grained control over what happens to shape the future of Lunenburg without having a complex document. So I'm pretty excited about that. So the first thing is the lot zone, and each property in Lunenburg will have one of 4 lots on it. And when you look at this table, basically it tells you how big lots need to be if you are creating new ones. So the minimum lot area, maximum or minimum frontage, that's how long along the street. And they correspond to, you know, kind of the historic development pattern of lots in Lunenburg. So, you know, Old Town, we see very small lots. You kind of get into New Town, they get bigger, and then we're getting a little more smaller in the you know, more contemporary areas. And the fourth one deals with things like it's a very flexible one to deal with industrial uses, parks uses, you know, things that don't necessarily have a traditional need for a block of lots. One thing to highlight here is that in the lot zone 1, which applies to much of Old Town, we actually have a maximum lot area and a maximum lot frontage. And these are to, you know, address concerns, worries of, you know, the term block busting, where someone buys up an entire block, consolidates it, and you lose that fine-grained development that's really characteristic of Old Town. So there's a lot zone map. You can see it's divided into 4 different zones. This is available, or an older version is available, and the new one will be up tomorrow. Should be up tomorrow. So you can go and look exactly what your property would be. Also related to lots and subdivision, we have infrastructure, the things that connect everything together and provide us our services. And obviously infrastructure is super important. The town is very fortunate to have you know, a network of pipes and sewer, water. But these are also, you know, they're expensive, and they're a liability in the sense that you need to upkeep them and maintain them. So the planning documents take the direction of using these to the best of our ability, you know, to take advantage of these services we have in the ground by requiring development to connect to sewer and water where it's available. The documents also prohibit new private roads. This is roads that aren't owned by the town or the province. Existing ones would be continued to exist. It's just not allowing the creation of new ones to avoid issues with civic addressing, emergency access, maintenance, that kind of thing. We've also implemented a new road standard, which also somewhat reduces the need for private roads, and it creates a new road standard that's easier to develop. And I'll let Stefan talk about that.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, this is another, we think, very exciting change in the subdivision bylaw. So the subdivision bylaw has specifications, technical standards for how you actually build new subdivisions or new development, and one of them is the road standards. And we've added a new road standard to the specifications that allow for very narrow right-of-ways and also very narrow travel lanes. So the actual what you see as pavement on the road is as narrow as it is allowed by the standards of the Transportation Association of Canada. So the reason for this is that we, and this is not unique to Lunenburg, over really the last century, since the dawn of the automobile, we have moved away from being able to build these narrow roads because we've prioritized movement of cars, and so most municipalities now in Nova Scotia have minimum road standards that are really wider than what we used to be able to build 100, 200 years ago. So Ian, if you could flip to the next slide. So what is one of the really key assets and characteristics of Lunenburg are these narrow residential streets in the old residential parts of the old town, so up the hill from the downtown. And these are roads that you could currently not build under the current subdivision bylaw if you were to develop a new area. And I think most people would agree that those are the kind of the intricate spaces, the really streets that act as public spaces where neighbors can interact, wave each other from across the street. We can have buildings built really close to the street, and create really interesting spaces that we think are not just attractive from a kind of public realm quality aspect, but are also attractive to developers because there's actually less infrastructure required, less paving, there's less land dedicated to public right-of-ways, and we believe there might be an uptake on that. It's not required, it's not mandatory, but it's an option.
Also related to subdivision is the parks and open space dedication. So when typically in Nova Scotia, when you subdivide a piece of land, there's an ability there for the municipality to require a dedication of land or money to provide parks and open space, so that we don't end up with subdivisions that don't have any green spaces. The default in Nova Scotia tends to be 5%, but you can require up to 10% if the municipal planning strategy outlines reasons to do so. So in this case, you know, there's there's three different approaches that we're taking to the parks and open space dedication. The first is that we, you know, heard a lot in the consultation that people are worried about losing traditional access to the coast, and you know that's an issue throughout Nova Scotia. So in the subdivision bylaw, we prioritize first open space dedications that provide access to the coast. So if a subdivision is happening on, you know, with waterfront, that is going to be the thing we're going to require, is that that there be public access given to the coast. If the subdivision is not on the coast, but it's within a distance of an existing public park, you know, there's already facilities there. What's more important at this point, we feel, is having the resources to reinvest in those facilities and keep them up. So in this case, cash would be the requirement. And then in the areas, you know, kind of the undeveloped areas of Lunenburg, where you can see expansion happening, particularly to the south, southwest, where there isn't existing public land, the requirement would be for usable land. So that is lot zones and subdivision. Then you move into the land use. So what is it you can use your land for? So we have a series of use zones. You can see them there on the screen. And like the lot zone map, we also have a use zone map that you look on your property and say, you know, what use zone am I in? And that will tell you what you're allowed to use the land for. And then in the documents, we have a big tables that show, for example, you know, if it's a P, that use is permitted in that use zone, or with the numbers, it's that many of units. So a couple things to highlight here. One is accessory dwellings is a new thing in these draft documents compared to the in-force planning documents. So this could be either a backyard suite, you know, carriage house, garage above a garage, or it could be a secondary suite, granny flat, whatever you want to call it, within a main dwelling. So, you know, what this really allows for is a kind of gentle intensification of residential areas within Lunenburg, and, you know, a diversification of housing options. There are standards in those to keep them accessory, maximum size, height, that kind of thing. You know, keep that a little bit invisible density or less visible density within areas of Lunenburg. There was a comment, we received some really good comments after the last public information meeting. And there's one about, you know, could we create use categories for affordable housing or moderately affordable housing? And definitely appreciate where this is coming from. I mean, affordable housing is a huge topic in Nova Scotia. If you haven't seen already, they just dropped a big report with a number of recommendations for increasing affordable housing in Nova Scotia. And so, yeah, certainly appreciate that comment. I just wanted to address it because it is one of those things, you know, we are working in a certain framework with these planning documents specifically, where the land use bylaw, for example, primarily deals with a development permit. You know, someone comes in to see if they can do a development on their property and gets the permit or not, and then goes and does it. And there are limited things related to, you know, making sure that that permitted use is still ongoing, or that certain standards continue to be met. But what isn't really possible there within this framework is the ability to do things like monitor that a unit continues to be affordable. So it's frustrating. I run into this all the time as a frustration that we don't have that power within these documents. But what is really exciting is that as a, you know, because this is part of a bigger project with the comprehensive community plan, there's other approaches within there that can be used to tackle the affordable housing issue with tools that are better suited to it. I don't think there's anything huge to flag on institutional uses. Commercial uses, a couple things to flag, I guess. One is, let me see. Oh yeah, short-term rentals. So another topic that came up a lot throughout the engagements for the CCP was short-term rentals, both in terms of their role in the tourism economy, but also a huge discussion around their impact on housing and housing affordability. So there are a number of recommendations in the CCP related to short-term rentals. And when I say short-term rentals, I mean things like Airbnbs, VRBOs, you know, the renting of a dwelling for less than a month. So again, you know, there are a number of recommendations in the CCP related to things like primary residence and nights in a year and all of that kind of thing that can't really be dealt with through a land use bylaw, and will get tackled through other processes. What the land use bylaw does is allows them, but limits them to one per lot. You know, so you don't necessarily have wholesale conversion of buildings to the quote unquote ghost hotels. And then other aspects of this will be dealt with through other processes. One of the other things is the land use bylaw does not allow short-term rentals in accessory dwellings. Again, you know, those accessory dwellings are really intended to encourage housing supply, and also, you know, when you talk about the impacts on neighborhoods and that gentle density idea, we felt that the short-term rentals weren't necessarily appropriate there. One of the questions that came up at the last public information meeting was, you know, is there a way to differentiate between renting to tourists, for example, and, you know, there's a need for things like short-term accommodations for the film industry and other year-round industries that, you know, temporary staff basically. And we gave it some thought and came to the conclusion that there really isn't. You know, again, through these land use bylaws, you're not regulating people. You're regulating the use of land, and the use of that case is the short-term rental of a dwelling, whether it's to a tourist or to someone working in the film industry. So there isn't really a way to differentiate between it here. And you know, maybe if we get into things like a short-term rental bylaw down the road, there might be other ways to do that, but not really through the land use bylaw, unfortunately. In the industrial uses, you'll see there's one here with the DA, that stands for a development agreement. So one of the major changes we've made with these documents compared to the existing ones is that we've greatly reduced the use of development agreements. So a development agreement's a contract between the municipality and the developer, and it basically, you know, is the creation of a mini zone almost for that controls just that property. And they have their strengths and advantages, but they're also a fairly intensive process. And we felt like with this new structure of having overlapping layers that we could deal with a lot of things that development agreements deal with and do it in a very straightforward way through these documents. So we really only use them in a very few cases through these documents. And one is heavy industrial, because there's a case where you really want to dig down into potentially the impacts, and through the development agreement potentially put limitations on the development in terms of operations and maybe needed equipment, or, you know, whatever it may be, to address any concerns related to that use. Other uses, anything to highlight here? Oh yeah, so there's a couple things. One is, so now the documents clearly make allowances for solar collector systems and also domestic scale wind systems. So these use tables that you see, these are for main use of the land, you know, the primary purpose for that, what that land is used. So it's, you know, in this example, you see solar collector systems, large scale. So they're only allowed in a few places. But there's also the ability to have accessory uses where you have, you know, my main use is a house, but an accessory use might be solar panels on the ground, or on on a structure on the ground. So there is allowances in the documents for accessory solar, accessory wind turbines, accessory electrical vehicle charging, a number of those things that, you know, make sense. I got ahead of myself there. Another potentially big change, and I think it's kind of exciting, is you know, typically in a land use bylaw in Nova Scotia and around a lot of North America, you'll have a minimum parking requirement. So number of parking spaces you're required to open a restaurant or have a dwelling or whatever it may be. There's a bit of a trend to move away from this, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Very often they require too much parking. It's a cost that's downloaded onto users. And again, I think we're making a place for people. And when we actually started, so in the initial drafts, we did actually have a table of parking requirements for automobiles. And then when we started to look at the exemptions, or the exceptions to them, we realized that, you know, maybe it wasn't necessary. So there's always been an exception within Old Town to the parking requirements, because you don't want to encourage people to tear down buildings to get the parking that they need. That's kind of counterproductive. Then you look at residential areas where lots are larger and people want the parking anyways, and it gets provided. So the one place where you might require it is along Victoria Road, the commercial area there. But there's lots of land. There's not really a need to make a trade-off between parking and other you know, uses of the land. They can both be accommodated. So we took the big step of actually just removing those requirements. We have, however, put in some very basic minimum bicycle parking requirements. Bicycling is growing as a utilitarian thing, you know, running errands, that kind of thing, or recreationally. It's also growing hugely as tourism. And I think what we're seeing is more and more, you know, people have electric bikes, they have fancy touring bikes, people looking for facilities to lock these up safely. And, you know, just recognize that cycling is an important part of our community. It's impossible to get a bike right now. So making that accommodation. There was a question at the last public information meeting about what happens if there's not space for bicycle parking. So in the Old Town area, there's an exemption there. Again, most of those buildings are right up against the street. We certainly don't want people to have to like tear off pieces of buildings to get parking in. So there's an exemption there. In other areas, if existing buildings are located too close to the street, there is an allowance to have the parking located somewhere else. And then there is also an ability to request a variance to bicycle parking numbers if there's some, you know, out of left field situation where it just couldn't be accommodated. So there is an ability in there to work with this. Also related to uses are non-conforming uses. So these are uses that were legally developed at one point in the past, either before planning existed or under an old land use bylaw, and the rules have since changed. And they are given, you know, people made investments in those. Usually, since they're existing, people tend to be pretty comfortable with them in the surrounding area. You know, it's what you know, and you're comfortable with it. So there are allowances in the Municipal Government Act to protect those investments and allow them to continue. You're not just going to say, hey, we changed the rules, you got to shut down your business or whatever it is. So the Municipal Government Act allows them to exist to continue for up to 6 months if they discontinue. So if you shut down your business, you have 6 months to restart it before you lose your status. We've extended that to 12. You know, things move slowly. 6 months in terms of development blinks by. So 12 is a little more reasonable, we found. And what we also allow is the expansion or conversion of a non-conforming use to another non-conforming use by development agreement if it's going to improve the situation. So here's another case. You know, you might have a non-conforming body shop, let's say, where you work on cars, and you think, well, maybe I'm going to convert it to a sheet metal shop where I'm going to bend gutters. It still would be non-conforming. It's not permitted in the zone, but you're not using heavy paints and all those kinds of things. So it would actually be an improvement over what's there. So we have a mechanism now to consider that. Which brings us to form.
Okay, yeah. So the last category is regulating form, and this has to do largely with building size, how much a building takes up on a lot, how far it is set back from property lines, how high it is, and other elements of the building. And what we've done, we've taken a bit of a deep dive in the comprehensive community plan and understanding the evolution of Lunenburg, and modeled our form zones after that growth of the town and how it shaped the form and size of buildings. Next slide, please. So here are just 4 examples of the new form zones that we created. And when I say new, they're really in most instances they're referencing old forms. So here's, for example, Old Town 1. This goes back to the original street grid established in 1753, and this is a form zone that is intended to protect the integrity of the core commercial district and the type of buildings that you see there. We move up the hill. Old Town Form Zone 1 is one that's intended to safeguard the tight-knit residential development pattern within those upper blocks of the Old Town Lunenburg. And then another example on this slide is Old Town, what we call Old Town, New Town Form Zone, Town 1 Form Zone, which is really intended to maintain the residential development pattern in parts of Lunenburg that was subdivided in the 1860s, 1870s, and to also enable new subdivisions to emulate that development pattern. And then if you move further out in the new town, there's another form zone that's intended to enable subdivisions that emulate the kind of 1950s and 1980s development character. Go next slide. So altogether we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 form zones. The first 2 ones I mentioned. Others are really don't see much change, anything related to industrial, rural, shoreline, and so on. We do have one particular new zone, that's the Main Street form zone, and this is applies to the area around Victoria Road, where you currently see the kind of the retail and services that are kind of one-story buildings, mostly for car related. And the direction of the comprehensive community plan was to turn Victoria Road into more of a multi-use Main Street area with buildings closer to the street, residential uses above ground floor retail, and so on. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is in detail again the form zone map that's on the previous version is on the website, as Ian mentioned, and perhaps one of the big changes to point out here again is Victoria Road, the pinkish area that we've dedicated to this Main Street zone. So in the established parts of Lunenburg, residential parts, really there's no major changes. Everything is similar to the previous or the current bylaw. one of the things we've changed in the Old Town 2 is, or generally actually in the bylaw, we added maximum front setbacks, so that ensures that people don't build a new subdivide and don't build a new building or rebuild a building far away from the street, uncharacteristic for the surrounding neighborhood. And so we essentially analyzed the maximum setbacks that we find in these different parts of towns now, and then set a number, between 4 and 6 and 10 meters for different parts of the town. This is the lot coverage. So as Ian mentioned, we're now allowing secondary suites. Backyard units, essentially granny flats, different names used for them. But what those units will do, obviously, is increase the lot coverage. So this is the space that a building or building footprints take up on your lot. And we've increased that number quite a bit. Our analysis showed we're running kind of between 20 and 25% currently. But we want to ensure that there's uptake on this new opportunity to develop in your backyard. And so we've taken those numbers up quite a bit to between 40 and 50% in residential areas. And again, in the main street, where we want to enable kind of the commercial Main Street central business district feel that we find in the old in the downtown and the commercial downtown, we allow 100% lot coverage. Next slide, please. So this is the building massing. No so the maximum building heights haven't really changed in the established areas. They are as they are in the current bylaw. We have added in the old town, so the old central business district, we've added a minimum building height, and that is essentially to prevent the kind of the single story commercial use type building that we see in the old town that have been developed over the decades. Not really highest and best use of the land, but also in terms of the character and the form of the old downtown, they don't really fit in. And we, not to mention particular names, but the kind of the dollar stores and the drug stores and the one-story buildings that we don't really we don't want to see in the established areas. The other, sorry, go ahead, Ian.
I guess to be clear, that's about form too. Like that. That's not the use.
Yep.
Stores, dollar stores.
Yeah, exactly.
Form that represents Old Town.
Yeah. And then again, going back to the main street here, we allow for 6-story buildings, and this is partially to do with the new building code allowances for wood frame construction that enables 6-story buildings. So it's essentially to incentivize developers to take advantage of that building code update and redevelop, make it attractive to redevelop the Victoria Street areas when buildings use the end of their life cycle, or owners change, uses change. And the idea here also is to have a minimum ground floor height. So this is a kind of a comfortable retail or services height. So you have a bit of an attractive streetscape along the sidewalk. We have also a minimum height of 10 meters, so that's 3 stories. So that's to ensure that we have a kind of a street wall that creates that kind of main street character. Sometimes we talk about the street as a room, and that is a three-dimensional thing that has there's essentially a street wall on either side of the street, and that make it comfortable from a human scale. We also have a maximum street wall height. So there's we should mention there are diagrams in the definition section of the bylaw that that depict these ideas I think in a really quite simple way. But I'll explain street wall quickly. It's essentially the area of the building that rises up from, let's say, the sidewalk, and then we say that should be a maximum 16 meters, and then everything above steps back from that street wall. And that the idea here is to again create that human scale where you walk along a sidewalk, you look up a building, you see the kind of the edge of the roof, and this is what the appearance of the height is. And then any higher sections of the buildings will be set back, and you actually don't experience them or see them as a pedestrian. Anything else here, Ian? No, yeah. So then accessory buildings, just maximum heights. This is again what you can build in your backyard. And I believe Ian mentioned it already in the use section, this the idea that and this came up quite a bit in the consultation for the comprehensive plan, this desire to allow developments that let people age in place, so stay in the community when you outgrow, or you want to downsize your home, you want to leave your home, you don't want to move into a condo, and there's a really exciting new trend, these group dwellings, and they're essentially multiple smaller individual buildings on a lot, often kind of centered around a common house, common space that is shared. And there are groups in Lunenburg that are already actively promoting these types of developments, and we're allowing them now in certain zones.
Yeah, and these group dwellings, they're not also just for seniors, but that's been a common use of them, kind of like having your home, but without all the maintenance requirements and upkeep and all that kind of thing. But they're also, as a form, usable for co-housing or bare land condominiums, or for example, if you're familiar with the treehouse development in Bridgewater, that co-housing development, that would be a group dwelling. So it allows some creative thinking in terms of what housing is and how we tackle it. So also, in the documents, obviously a big concern is sea level rise, climate change, and the resulting sea level rise from that. Also, Nova Scotia sinking as a result of post-glacial rebound. So between Nova Scotia sinking and the water levels rising from global warming, we have a concern about flooding. We expect kind of over the next 80 years that water levels in Nova Scotia are going to go up by about 1 meter. And then you combine that with a big storm, kind of a Hurricane Dorian or Juan or whatever it may be, and you have potential for some serious damage. So what these draft documents do is there's a flood risk area map where we've modeled that extra 1 meter plus a big storm surge. And within these areas, if you're going to develop, you basically have to keep the floor elevation of habitable areas above that flood level, above that elevation. So habitable being areas where people live. So basically, you know, you don't have someone's home being flooded and the risk to human life that would come with that. Also within these areas, we require that hazardous materials, potential pollutants, you know, fuel oil, that kind of thing, are either not located below that elevation, or if they are, that they're designed in a way to safely confine that risk in the event of a flooding event. So, you know, this will particularly apply in the waterfront industrial zones. And then also that there's consideration for the placement of flood vulnerable mechanical and electrical. So, you know, if there is a flood, that your building's generator isn't going to get flooded and shut the building down or create a hazardous situation for emergency crews. So placing those again above the elevation or designing them in a flood tolerant manner. So there's the map there of the areas that are below that elevation. Also related to form is signage. Things are generally pretty similar here, though we've simplified the language a lot. We've responded to a request to reduce the height for projecting signs, you know, like the signs that stick out from buildings, make them a little easier to install while still keeping them safe. We've addressed some contemporary signage issues, menu boards and digital signs. And then just in the simplifying language, just making it more clear about what the limits on signs on a site are. You know, having making very clear that there is a maximum number of ground signs, that kind of thing, just to, you know, obviously signs are important. They're how we find the things we want to find, but you can have too much of good things. So just having reasonable restrictions around that and making it clear what they are. So we might not have required parking, you know, requiring you to provide parking, but where parking is, you know, if someone does provide parking, we have standards for the form that will take. So, you know, for large parking lots larger than 18 spaces, basically the requirement is they have to be broken down into individual little parking lots to avoid that sea of asphalt with landscaping in between them. We also have limits on the number of parking spaces you can have in the front or flankage yard. Flankage yards for corner lots, that's the other front yard. Again, not having big parking lots in the front, really promoting that human scale development and a place for people rather than a place for cars. And there are also basic requirements for minimum provision of electrical vehicle charging in structured parking. So that's parking garages and underground parking. Like non-conforming uses, you can also have non-conforming structures. So that, again, that's a building or structure that was legally constructed at some point in the past, either before planning or under an old set of planning rules that would no longer be permitted. So, you know, a big one is you often see in communities is houses that were built right up to the street and the rules have changed and you wouldn't be allowed to do that now. That's maybe not so much the case in Lunenburg. A lot of our form zones allow very minimal front setbacks, but you could, you know, you might see a situation where the house doesn't meet a minimum front setback. What we have made allowances for is expansions of non-conforming structures as long as it doesn't make the non-conformance worse. So again, we go back to that house that's too close to the street. The documents say you can expand it, no problem, as long as the expansion isn't also within that area that's too close to the street. So you can put a kitchen on the back, not changing things, but you can't put an extension on the front that's going to make that worse. Obviously, a huge important topic in Lunenburg is heritage and architectural control. So there are, within the existing planning documents, there is the Heritage Conservation District. There is also architectural control areas. You know, and I think there's been a lot of discussion around those, and particularly the architectural control and how that should be done. The town has initiated a project to review those documents and review those regulations, but that project is kind of on the back burner while these planning documents get put into place. So for now, what we were doing is basically copy and pasting with minor fixes from the old documents into the new one, everything related to heritage and architectural control. And then at a later date, once this follow-up project is completed, the town will be able to go back and amend these planning documents to delete or change or add to whatever comes out of these conversations of how we should approach heritage and architectural control. The town will be able to update these documents to address that. So for now, no change, but expect something in the future. We've updated definitions. So at the back of the land use bylaw, there's definitions that tell you what everything is, what we're talking about. So we're all on the same page. We've updated them as necessary and taken this as an opportunity to add illustrations. For example, as Stefan mentioned, what is a street wall? A picture can often show that easier than I can describe it to you in words. This one up here is a flag lot. So we've added a bunch of images throughout the definitions to help understanding and make these as usable as possible. So that's the big picture of everything that's gone into these. As I mentioned, we had a public information meeting May 26th. There was a number of good comments and questions, and we caught a couple of things coming out of that. So we've updated the documents. We're going to go through them with Planning Advisory Committee tonight in detail. But I'll give a highlight of what's changed. So of course, correcting any typos and errors we caught along the way. We had started adding imperial conversions and hadn't finished them in the last draft. So those are finished now. So the documents are officially metric, and we encourage people to use that. It's certainly the most precise, and it's, if you're down to the wire in terms of looking for centimeters to fit your development, it's the one that's going to get you the most. But for people who think in imperial, those numbers are there now to make it easier to visualize everything. We've updated definitions of lot lines to account for islands and lots that don't have road frontage. And we've updated the definition of craft food and beverage production to exclude restaurants and licensed liquor establishments unless those uses are otherwise permitted in the zone. So you can have the manufacturing piece of it, and then if you're in a use zone that allows restaurants, for example, then you could combine them to make a brew pub or something like that. We corrected the image for the Lunenburg bump in the definitions. We added a definition for wind turbine. There's a couple of other, so at the back there's a Schedule A that identifies existing uses that makes them existing rather than non-conforming, so that they can be treated just like any other use in the document. There was a couple that were identified that we added in. We tweaked some wording on home-based businesses related to I think it said tailoring and dressmaking, and someone had a good suggestion of making it tailoring and commercial sewing, just to be more inclusive. We added a maximum building footprint to the shoreline form zone. So this is the zone that's primarily along the back harbor. It's also on the little island off the Abco lands, and that form zone is really primarily intended to be kind of an open shoreline with allowances for boating structures and that kind of thing. So there's a maximum footprint in there now to fulfill that intent. And then there's a lot of questions in the follow-up emails about water infilling and impacts on the harbor and that kind of thing. So one of the things we did do was added consideration for impacts on the harbor to the criteria for evaluating development agreements and any amendments to the land use bylaw. So these are the planning applications that go to council, and within the municipal planning strategy, there's a whole list of criteria that council looks at when they say, is this appropriate or not to enter into this development agreement or to amend the land use bylaw. And now they can, there's one there related to impacts on the harbor. Sorry, just make sure I'm not missing anything. And finally, in the subdivision specifications, we've had a whole chapter related to street signage. and just the procedures for things like stop signs and street names and all that kind of stuff. So I guess next steps, I see we've got a couple of questions here that we'll take a look at and answer them to the best of our ability. Later tonight, PAC is reviewing these documents and hopefully making a recommendation on them to council. As Don mentioned, this would go June 22nd, and if council finds fit to give first reading, there could be a public hearing and potentially second reading, or at a later night for second reading on July 27th. And then, assuming council adopts the documents, they go off to the province for review against the statements of provincial interest. And if all goes well, then we're in business. So that is that. Questions? So the first question is, at the PAC meeting on May 19th, recommendation for hotel, condos, apartment development on Masons Beach Road was discussed, with the option to extend the development agreement to allow the development to go longer. Why would the town do this when we're about to enter into new planning documents that say differently? So for now, these documents that we were talking about, they are drafts, and for all intents and purposes, for council's purposes and PAC's purposes, in terms of making decisions, these documents do not exist. Council, I just mentioned previously, but there's that long list of things that that council looks at when they do their evaluation. Oh yeah, I've asked to stop sharing screen. There is a long list of things that council looks at when they do their evaluation, and they have to make their decision based on what is in the municipal planning strategy as their criteria. And that makes their decision defensible to the utility and review board. So again, they're going on what's in the documents. That is their role. And these don't exist for all intents and purposes until they're adopted. The next question is, what is meant by workshops? RE land use, commercial uses. So in the definitions, a workshop means the use of a building or part thereof for the creation of products assembled or made by hand or by small custom production processes, including but not limited to potters, pewters, goldsmiths, silversmiths, jewelers, toy makers, leather workers, upholsterers, woodworkers, furniture makers, musical instrument makers, clothing designers, clothes makers, shoe makers, antique refinishers, glass workers, stained glass workers, and sail makers. The definition shall also include maker spaces.
Okay, next question is regarding housing affordability. With the urgent response to climate change and the need to improve energy efficiency, increase renewables, and reduce carbon, what energy standards are proposed for new housing developments and retrofits? Could Lunenburg take the lead in Nova Scotia, like in BC, and adopt the Passive House of Fabric First standard, which is increasingly being used in social housing to tackle fuel poverty and reduce energy bills in both short-term and long-term tenants? Without exactly knowing what the BC standards are that you're referring to, our assumption would be that this is likely a standard that applies, for example, to the provincial housing authority in BC, which we have here in Nova Scotia as well. So that's a provincially imposed standard for public housing that gets developed to require that those are built to a particular standard, whether it's leadership in energy efficiency and design or passive house. So this is outside the town's authority, really, but it is something that quite potentially could happen here in Nova Scotia as well on a provincial level. And then there's, of course, always the opportunity as well for the municipality to kind of self-impose standards, energy standards, energy efficiency standards for developments that town undertakes. So if you build a new facility, a new recreation facility, for example, the municipality could say, we only build passive house or LEED standard facilities moving forward. But again, that's outside the land use bylaw.
Yeah, and to add to that, even in private development, I think there are places that are looking at it for private development, but it really is a building code issue. The land use bylaw kind of is the development side of it, and the box that goes around you, where, like, you know, the massing of the building, but it doesn't get into the what's in the walls or that kind of thing. So it would have to be changes to the building code to do that kind of thing.
Next question is, with the new plan, what could happen to the park on Blockhouse Hill and also the campground on the hill? So referring back to the comprehensive community plan, the park is maintained and also in the land use bylaw in the zoning. But the direction of the comprehensive community plan is to remove the campground and make that land available for development.
Next question, is there a minimum size requirement for co-housing islands? Are they able to be movable? So we have no minimum housing sizes in the documents, not looking to exclude anyone. There's a lot of creative stuff being done, and you know, certainly related to affordability, how size ties into that for sure. So there's no minimum housing sizes. Whether they can be movable, possible, but again, when you're dealing with building code, I assume we're talking about tiny homes, you know, the houses on wheels, but there are you run into building code issues potentially. So, but from a land use bylaw perspective, it doesn't address that one way or another.
Next question, it would be better to have council ask these questions. It is political. I'm not sure what this one's referring to. Must have been an answer of ours. So we'll take that as a comment, I guess.
So the next question again is in relation to the Mason's Beach Development Agreement. Can the council not wait until the new framework's in place before addressing the extension? So again, the documents that are in place are the documents that exist. That is what council works under now. And the council does have an obligation to work with those and work in a timely manner under those. Next question is regards to questions submitted last week by email regarding mobile canteens. Oh yes, thank you. Thanks for reminding me of that. So the question was, you know, is there broadly any consideration of allowing mobile canteens in other areas? The bylaw currently only speaks to the mixed use, the commercial mixed use zone, which is the zone that's along Victoria Road. So we have not really touched that. Basically what we've done is, again, like the architectural control and heritage content, we've basically copy and pasted and then updated it as necessary to fit in the current documents, but anything that was related to vending, because mobile canteens fall under vending, they're not development. And what's really needed here is an update to the vending bylaw. It's kind of funny that they're in the land use bylaw, but as they are, we didn't want to, you know, have a gap until the vending bylaw got updated. So we haven't touched that in the current documents, and that would have to come as a later project, I think. So the next question was, is Project Lunenburg, appreciate that Project Lunenburg sits outside the current MPS policies, but was it aware of Mason's Beach and any other development agreements? So yeah, so we were, aware of, you know, existing development agreements and things that were under consideration as documents were being developed. But I think it's fair to say that this is a, I guess we were aware of them for sure. Stefan, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, we were. We were always forwarded active cases, and we're quite aware of what was going on in Lunenburg. Yeah.
So we've now had the opportunity to answer all of the public's questions. So thank you, Ian and Stefan, again for your great presentation and your update, and for taking the time with us and answering everyone's questions. And I'm just wondering if any of the PAC committee members had questions for Ian or Stefan at this point. Not seeing any hands raised. Councillor Halverson. You're on mute.
I'm trying. It's tough getting this working. Technology is so hard. I again appreciate the update here, guys. I saw the slide with the updates. I'm a little concerned because I don't know. I can't relate them. I see the updates, but some of them didn't actually indicate how they impacted or how the change was affected. Can you point to, you know, in the MPS, the LUB, where those changes are made, how, and the difference that it's made in the document, please?
Yeah, for sure. Just in terms of procedurally wise, is this a PAC meeting thing? Is this a public?
That's what I was wondering. Yeah.
We can go through the track changes certainly in the documents. Just wondering.
Okay, so for process, I would look to someone to move that we close the public information meeting and move to the PAC committee meeting. Moved by Councillor Ernst, seconded by Councillor Halverson. Any other questions or discussion before we close the public information meeting? All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion approved. So we now move into the new business and the new draft planning documents for the municipal planning strategy, land use bylaw, subdivision bylaw with specifications. So to Councillor Halverson's question at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I think what the easiest thing to do is maybe share my screen again, and I can just jump through the track changes. They're pretty relatively limited. Give me a second here. So here's the municipal planning strategy, updated to June 2nd. So in the description of the form zones, chapter 5, page 30, we've made a small change to reflect that the shoreline form zone isn't just on the back harbor. It's primarily there, but not only there. In policy 619 on page 43, this is again that policy that's related to the criteria council considers when amending the land use bylaw or entering into a development agreement. So council shall not enter into one unless council is satisfied the proposal is not premature or inappropriate due to, and there's a huge list of things: servicing, fire protection, impacts on UNESCO, and we have added one, impacts on the navigability and environment in Lunenburg Harbor. So those are the changes for the municipal planning strategy. Jump to use bylaw. Seeing that all right? So as I mentioned, so within the home-based business regulations on page 18. There's a list of uses that shall be permitted as home-based businesses. We've updated dressmaking just to say commercial sewing. It's a little broader and more inclusive. In bicycle parking locations related to the development officer being able to waive the front yard requirement, we've made it clear that this is in cases where it's impossible due to an existing main building being located on or near the front lot line. So if you're building a new one, you're expected to be considerate of bicycle parking needs. In the building form chart 7.7 for main buildings, we've added the maximum building footprint in the shoreline zone of 47 square meters or 505 square feet roughly. Then there's a whole bunch of them that are just me adding conversions. Next, in definitions for craft food and beverage production, we've added that, so it may include public tasting and retail sales, but does not include a restaurant or licensed liquor establishment unless those uses are permitted as main use in the applicable zone. So again, that's what it's, so in some areas it's just manufacturing, primarily the industrial zone, and you can do tasting, but if you want to have a brew pub, you need to be in a zone that would permit the pub part of it. Again, in definitions under lot line, we've clarified, again, adding text related to primarily front lot lines to address islands and also to address lots that have no frontage, because normally you define the lot line based on road frontage. And we fixed the image of the Lunenburg bump and added a definition of wind turbines because there wasn't one previously. And finally, added 205 Pelham Street to the list of existing uses, which has a law office and a residential bill. Stop sharing. Share screen. No changes to the subdivision bylaw except for one typo. And then to the specifications. At the very end, we added a whole section on road signage, basically saying that road signage has to meet the standards of the standard bodies that regulate those things, that they have to be placed in the road right of way, that stop signs must be installed and that the developer is responsible for that cost. Traffic signals if necessary, that road names have to be approved by the civic address coordinator, and that again, signs have to be put up for those at the developer's cost, and that other road signage is at the developer's cost at the discretion of the engineer. Also, last but not least, just let me open these up here. There was a few tweaks to the maps. Here. Zones. Screen. We fixed the north arrow on them, so some of them were broken. On the use zoning map, the old foundry, we moved into the waterfront use zone out of the marine industrial to better reflect the mixed use goals for that site. And we, just a second here. Oh, just the graphical corrections on that one. The other change was on the lot zones. We added a lot zone to the little island. It had been missed. And on the form zone, we had changed this, thinking this site previously in the last draft, thinking it was the visitor information center. It's not. That's the there's a residential care facility there, so that's in the community. Put that back in the community form zone, and that was it. Those are the changes to the maps. That, I think, is the extent of the changes.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Halverson, did you have any other questions for Ian in relation to that?
Nope, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee for Ian or for Stefan? Not seeing any, so now we'll move to our motion. So our motion is to recommend that council give first reading and set a public hearing date for the draft municipal planning strategy, land use bylaw, and subdivision bylaw with specifications dated June the 2nd of 2021 with minor non-substantive changes. So would I need the screen share to stop? And I'm looking for someone to, Marissa, did you have a comment?
I just had a question for the planner. Would we not want to make that with any minor non-substantive changes required? There may be none required.
Through the chair, I think Ian had said that the cross-referencing for the
Oh, yes. Sorry. So
Yeah,
they
I think
definitely
we're,
will be
like a
required. My
few.
mistake.
Yeah.
Yep. Never mind. Withdrawn.
Okay. So I'm looking for someone to move and second the motion. Moved by Councillor Halverson, seconded by Councillor Ernst. Is there any further discussion? Dawn? No? No further discussion, so all in favor? Contrary minded? Motion approved. Unanimous. Our next meeting date will be as required, so everybody gets to catch their breath and breathe for a little bit. It's been a busy time in the last few weeks, and I'd like to have someone move and second we adjourn our meeting. Moved by Councillor Halverson, seconded by Councillor Ernst. Meeting adjourned. Mayor Risser, sorry.
Sorry, just before we adjourn, Madam Chair, we are adjourned, but just before we get off the broadcast, I note that Blaine has another question. So Blaine, if you email somebody at the town, we can get a response to you. Either Dawn or myself.
Thank you, Mayor Risser. And that concludes our meeting.